Okay, Tomas, it's all yours.
All right, so just in a good way, in a special way, I want to first and foremost thank Profesora for this space, this beautiful space, and educating all of you. It's really beautiful to see y'all right here with her in this space. Want to offer up Profesora also for all her good work in the community. Fuerza Machica, really appreciate it. She's also my cabeza en danza. I haven't been able to go for a while, but still I haven't given my palabra, so that's what's up. So really quick, just really quick, this is the last lecture, it sounds like. So can I be a little bit of a sounding board really quick? And can I hear back from y'all about what everybody thinks of culturally relevant education after this 15 weeks, 14 weeks right now, I think it is. I'd like to hear your perspectives and where you position yourselves, but more so where you position yourselves on Chumash land, right? Because most of you probably go to CSUCI, I imagine. So how you position yourself on Chumash land in your understanding of culturally relevant education. So I'd just like to listen for a couple of minutes and hear what y'all got to say.
All right, y'all. So we do want to hear from you, your powerful voices. You know how important that is. Does anyone need clarification on the question?
Is it more of like living in the Ventura County? Because I just recently came to Channel Islands. I'm a transfer student, but I haven't lived there. But I know like the area, and I never knew about the history of Chumash and Ventura until after I've been in this class, and I've learned a lot more. And I feel like learning this is making me feel more respectful of like Native culture, and I have to appreciate what they've given me, because we wouldn't be here because of them, and we wouldn't have the land that we have because of them, because they were here before our colonists. And I just want to give thanks to that, and I want to give thanks to our professor too for teaching us the ways of their culture, and just in general, like just being open-minded about things and learning about like the actual history and the actual like economic status of them. Because I know how you had one speaker in here, she was talking about the poverty of Native Americans, and that's just very sad because our government doesn't talk about that. And they say that they fund them, but where's the proof? And that's just something that I really appreciate her acknowledging and showing that to us.
Thank you for that. I want to reflect right back to, like you really hit on a very poignant position there about government status and government funding of Native peoples, right? And how that came about, and understanding that a lot of this came out from like the EPA. A lot of tribes received recent federal recognition by actually fighting for land rights, like Standing Rock is a good example. The natives fighting the telescope on top of their sacred mountains in Hawaii is another example, not just talking about American natives, right? Hawaii has their own natives also. So thank you for bringing that up, because it's an ongoing fight, trying to get our treaties and our sovereign rights back to us. So I appreciate that position. Anybody else?
I do just want to make sure that you're all still following the chat, and you can also comment in there. But I did put, if you all look up the hashtag land back, there's a lot of conversation going on about that in the government and broken treaties and how Indigenous people are still fighting to get their land back. So make sure that you follow that on social media. Just put in the hashtag land back. But again, we want to hear from you as far as what has a culturally relevant type of education that you've been receiving through this class, or maybe even other classes. How has that been for you in comparison to classes that are not culturally relevant?
And if you don't feel like talking, feel free to throw it in the chat also. We'll go ahead and read that out loud. Still want to hear your voice, even though it may be typed. So that's also a very good way to put that voice out there. If you have something that you don't want to share with everybody, also you can send it to Profesora by herself, and then she can just announce it anonymously also. So if nobody's willing to come forward with the next question, or the answer to that question, let's put out another question getting back to this education. Okay, so does anybody know where original educational standards came from? How did we come about with standards? So we'll come back around to culture after we figure out how we got here.
Well, in the last class, when we also talked about education, one of the speakers said that the education system started to get children out of the workforce. So I don't know if that has something to do with it. And he kind of said that there wasn't any standards.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. Anybody else want to add to that? Piggyback on that?
I was going to say religion plays a lot of the standards because in American culture, like religion is based off a lot of things. And I feel like education can come off as that as well, because there's like I don't know how to explain it. It's like it's not a hierarchy, but it's like stages within like the education system. And I feel like that's what they implement for now.
Awesome. Yeah, you're hitting super close to that. Situated again within the Southwest, within California, we're in a particularly special spot to talk about education, right? Because the education that came from the East Coast got to us last. So in recognizing that, they had already had their practices with other indigenous peoples as they were moving across the United States. And when they finally got to the US, they had a lot of those practices in place, especially the Protestants and the Presbyterians. A lot of them already had those practices in place. So one of those first practices hit the ground in New Mexico. So if anybody knows family from New Mexico, they'll know it's a really big mix in the region of natives, Spanish people from Spain, and Mexicans all in one area. But I bring this up particularly because the area already had schools in it. So the area was already functioning with the Catholic Church. It was also functioning under Mexico's basic schools, which was really like a teacher coming out to the pueblo and teaching really basic rudimentary things. So again, I bring this up because what happened from that point on is there was a battle between Catholics and Presbyterians, not just for your soul, but also for education. So from that position, excuse my dogs, a lot of supervisor seats that once belonged to Latinos, that once belonged to Mexicans and Native people in those regions were taken over by Anglos. So coming back to where did those standards come from, right? One, they came from the church, but they also came from seats that were taken over that were once held by Latin people, saying that Spanish in the classroom was okay, to completely no Spanish in the classroom, completely heterogeneous, English speaking only. So I just wanted to give a little prefix again to where did culture get removed before we can really kind of dive into like, what does that look like now for y'all? So does anybody want to reflect back on that story and kind of think about how those two things intermix, natives, the Catholic Church, Mexico, and Presbyterians? That's kind of like soupy water right there.
I did just want to add real quick, but y'all are quiet today, so I want to really hear your voices. But I'm going to interject real quick just to remind you all that in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, in it, it was guaranteed that the Mexican Americans would have equal access to education, and that education would be bilingual and bicultural. Okay, so somebody had the smarts, right, to make sure that that was included in the treaty. It's like, okay, you know, you're about to take our land, but keep in mind that we're already Mexican, and so in order for us to be able to adjust to this new reality, this is the kind of education that we're going to need, and so that our language and our culture is still honored, right? Now, to this date, there is not one treaty in US history that has been honored, right? So obviously we went from that being in the treaty to still today in 2020 having to fight for access to quality education for all students, especially students of color, and having to fight and to still have to justify bilingual education, multicultural education, and even ethnic studies, right? Like we're still having to fight for that. So just wanted to remind you all about that as well. And we do have Marcos with us, so hi Marcos, thank you for joining. Okay, so anything else about what Tomas was just asking?
And then just off of that, can I get a quick show of hands? Raise your hand in the participant chat if this is your first Chicano Studies class or if you've had other Chicano Studies class before.
Do you see the thumbs up too?
See the
There's
thumbs
two
up? All
pages
right,
with the
all
student.
right.
You gotta click back and forth.
All right, then y'all are knowledgeable then. Y'all got game already.
So for most, this is their first class.
All right, beautiful. So this is a very beautiful introduction to your future, hopefully in Chicano studies. And I say that in a good way too, because I hopefully, if y'all ever need a letter or you need a recommendation to CISA, hit myself up or Profesora. We'll be happy to stand before you and help you out and get you up there, right? That's what's up. That again is to me, and I do want to pass the palabra to Marcos. But to me, that's really what culturally relevant education is about. It's about raising your consciousness first, healing your inner niño or your inner niña or your inner non-conforming person, healing that person up, and then going forth and trying to heal other people up or helping other people to heal up, right? So that's, to me, again, going back to that understanding. Why are we bringing this cultura to the education? And that they go hand in hand, la cultura cura. With our culture, we can also heal the educational systems, not just ourselves. So yeah, with that, I'd love to pass the palabra.
If you want to take another maybe few minutes, Tomas, I don't want to cut you short either. So if you have other stuff that you wanted to talk to students about, you have about another few minutes.
Okay, cool. Perfect. And that goes to, okay, again, show of hands. I'm trying to, make this very active learning and keep participants engaged. Can I have a show of hands and who wants to go on to a master's degree from here? I see one. Thinking about it. Any other fingers up with thinking about it?
3, 4.
All right. Everybody's thinking about it.
Go.
All right. And who has dreams for the PhD? You can still keep popping them up. Let me put my little hand up first too, right, aquí. All right, so put myself in there. All right, beautiful. Again, just seeing that shows me that, the future of cultural education and people within cultural education is going to be there, right? And it's challenging you also. It's putting out that challenge, fuerza mexica, as you go forward in this, right? Go forward, with your people, not just behind you, but in front of you, on the side of you. Maybe if you have a baby like me, you're carrying them. So, sometimes when you're going forward, one of my favorite things to do, and hopefully this ties in, was when I did danza before COVID, was to dance with my baby in my arms. That was my favorite thing. She would hang on my neck, and as we spun, she would scream and hold on tighter, right? But to me, that's leaving, basically water on the semillas. So that's kind of like what that cultural education is for us. It's watering those semillas, right? Profe right now is watering y'all as semillas. And sooner or later, y'all is going to flower, right? You're going to be back in your community doing the good work that your heart tells you to do. And all this cultural education is going to be that water within your soul that's going to keep you hydrated, because the world's hard. And as we go forward, the best advice that I can give you is when you go to the community, listen to your innate self. Listen to your innate self. That's a big one. Listen to your innate self. Have advisors, but ultimately your decisions are your decisions when you're working in the community, and you have to stand for them like your palabra. So listen to your innate self, because at the end, that's the only person you're going to be responsible to. And that takes a lot of healing, right? Because we have that impostor syndrome in education. We have that impostor syndrome when we're in our careers. We have an impostor syndrome when we're trying to organize. Can I do this? Is this really me? Can I get that graduate degree? Can I get that PhD? It's the LC versus el no. And within this educational game, let's try to stay in the LC. Yes, your inner self. Innate self is kind of like when people say that one thing that you've known that you've been since a child. Like I know since a child I've been an artist. I just know I have. Some people have been dancers. Some people have been singers. Some people have just been whatever they are. The innate self is that. It's a very existential question. You'll get to that later on as your master's progresses and and why we think and how we think and the way we think. But yeah, it's that. Let's see. You should be a lawyer. My wife's a lawyer. It's a crazy road. You know, like she followed her dreams to do that, and you should do it. You know, we need good lawyers out there. They're clutch for a lot of things that you wouldn't think of. Um, so yeah, I just think that as you follow your educational dreams, sorry for the dogs, study what you want to study, research what you want to research. Don't let people dictate your research, because ultimately it's yours. It's your palabra that's going down on those pages. It's going to be you suffering every single night writing those theses and dissertations. So do what you love, because not doing what you love, trying to write that, doesn't come out very clean. You know, do what you love, write about what you love the best that you can. And that in itself is creating culture within education, because once your thesis hits the shelf, anybody in the world can search it.
Yeah.
Anybody. That means the whole entire world can understand what you think about a certain topic. That is huge, huge, huge. I mean, if you want to study Chicana eyeliner and eyebrows, then do that, because there's a bunch of cholas in Japan that want to know exactly how to do it. They want to know the angles. You know, you want to study tube stocks and cholos, you know, like do that, you know, like, because again, who else is going to do it but you? You know, again, the challenge, fuerza, machica, fuerza, go forward, you know, help the people out, but be happy while you're doing it. So I don't know. I think that's pretty much all I have to say. Grind it out, you know, get those A's, be better than the person before you. And one more thing, 10% more every day. I don't know if any of you all know who David Goggins is. Look that up. David Goggins, he's a little bit military, but his message is solid. You just give 10% more every day, and sooner or later you're running at 120% all the time. You know, don't settle for what you can do. Settle for the best that you can do. Because why? The creator is watching you. Not your friends, not your peeps, the creator. And you're put on this earth for a reason. And that reason is only up to you. So with that, all my relations, love and respect to each and every one of you. I hope your road is soft and also hard, because in that way your feet learn both sides of that. When they hit the soft road, they know. When they hit this hard road, they know what to do also. So love and respect to everybody.
Gracias, hermano. So, you know, you're making me think of all these things, right? Is that culturally relevant education is not only in the classroom and within school systems. Culturally relevant education is whatever you make your life to be. So you're all young adults and you have the ability within you to continue to decolonize your identities and to continue to learn about and research your ancestry, your heritage, your ancestral ways of being and knowing and learning, right? And so that's a long road, but every day you should be taking a step on that road. Okay, so you know, just having hermano Tomas here is reminding me, right, that everything that we do is not only within the classroom but outside of the classroom, right? So the way that we live our lives is identifying as indigenous people who are trying to reclaim our indigenous identities and ways of being in everything that we do, whether it's in our artwork, in the dances that we participate in. Tomas is also a sun dancer. He's also a fire keeper and helps run sweat lodges. You know, I've had the honor of being in many of those ceremonies with him. And so this is like not just when we're sitting in classrooms, right? But this is our way of life. This is our way of being. And so I invite all of you to embrace that. And to reach out, because we're all out here, you know, we're here and we're here to serve our gente, to serve our communities. So it's not like you don't have access to this. You have access to this. And this class is just the beginning. It's just opening the door for you. But it's up to you to like widen that door open, bring others with you and step into that world and never look back. Okay, so thank you again for those reminders, hermano. And there he is, he's putting his email in the chat. If y'all want to reach out to him, you know, the students also want to try to get involved in doable and attainable but impactful activities as agents of change. So if there's anything that you're working on and you need some help, students can reach out to you and, give them a little assignment to do. Easy, something
Please
easy
do.
and attainable because we're at the end of the semester.
Please do. Please do.
All right, y'all. So with no further ado, and I hope you stay with us, Tomas, so we can continue the conversation. I'm going to go ahead and introduce to you another hermano here, Marcos Aguilar. So let me go ahead and introduce you officially. Marcos Aguilar is co-founder and currently serves as executive director of Semillas, Sociedad Civil. In 2001, he served as charter school developer for Escuelas Autonomas Dignidad, a community-based group of parents and educators where he was responsible for designing the curriculum, organizing strategic plans, and community mobilization, budget management, and governmental relations. He also served as a bilingual single subject secondary teacher for the LA Unified School District from 1994 to 2001. Mr. Aguilar received a bachelor's degree in Chicana Chicano Studies from the University of California, Los Angeles in 1994. He additionally, he holds both a single subject teaching credential in social science and a master's in education administration from California State University, Los Angeles. Bienvenido, hermano. How are you? Thank you for joining us. I'm gonna try to unmute you. Oh yeah, you gotta unmute. There we go.
Gracias. Thank you so much for the invitation. I think about the days that we imagined as youth, how Chicana and Chicano Studies would become in the future. What kind of people in the future would take these courses, who we imagined we were serving as student organizers, as young people committed to a vision of mobilization and militancy and direct action, and also looking for spirituality in the practice of education and the practice of learning, and then thinking about the moment right now, sharing these words across the territories of the Chumash and the Tongva and the Tataviam and all the other nations who intersected with them and are in relationship with them, including our own peoples. I'm appreciative of this moment and of the intergenerational aspect of sharing these words and thoughts and aspirations that we have. And thinking about cultural relevance in the university and in the college setting, and just in general in schools, it is from the get-go contradictory, because we're challenged with having to define how we're related to institutions of colonization that are designed to assimilate and to make us disappear. And we're looking for those rays of sunshine that we believe about education, that education is liberatory, that education is humanizing, that education is about life, that education is about giving back, that education is about picking ourselves up, about improving things, about changing things from generation to generation. And we have to then think about what's relevant about a system that has taught us the opposite, and how can we expect it to do the opposite of what it was established to do. And why do we have this belief, this fundamental contradictory belief that these structures can provide platforms for us to be able to help others? We're left with of course the examples of generations before us, generations like that of Dr. Juan Gomez Quiñones, who passed away a few days ago, a dear friend of ours who was a co-founder of Chicana Chicano Studies, an organizer of the walkouts in East LA, a co-author of the Plan de Santa Barbara and the Plan de Aztlán, a co-convener of the National Chicano Youth Liberation Conference in Colorado and in Santa Barbara, an organizer of national and international movements for social change, both radical and mundane, and a scholar who left a countless number of words in both poetry and prose, who was born of the streets of Parral, Chihuahua, and given an edge in the streets of Boyle Heights and downtown LA, who faced down cops and politicians and himself, and shared with me one time, as we prepared for yet another meeting to try to convince yet somebody else that we mattered, that they ought to help, that we ought to organize, that we should change something, that we should do something, that there's hope, that there's a way to make life a little bit better. And the compañero that we were going to meet with was remarking upon Dr. Gomez Quiñones, who at the time was probably, well over 70, and he was, kind of like questioning why he was still involved after all these years. And his answer was I think relevant to our conversation today. He said, "El cerro es viejo, pero reverdece." And we look for these teachings in nature to help guide us, knowing that even though these institutions have established themselves and even established root on these lands that gave us birth, and even though the systems don't seem to have any indication of falling apart on their own, crisis after crisis, and even though our peoples somehow find beyond the blood, the sweat, and the tears, example after example after example after example of getting up and moving on, that somehow we find these eternal lessons, these eternal powers that are given strength from the roots that we have on this earth, from the way we connect with each other, from the way we care for each other, from the way we imagine we'd like to be. And I think at the end of the day, asking ourselves what cultural relevance means is asking ourselves some basic human questions. What matters about life? What matters about us? What matters about me? What does it matter that I do anything today or tomorrow? And it's important for us to think of that on a human level, on a natural level, because it's only then that we can realize that full context of the depth of the contributions that our elders make, that our communities make, that our people construct every day. It's only then that we can find meaning in how a drywaller hangs a sheet of drywall, how a mother breastfeeds, how we find water in the desert, how an abandoned baby can be still raised to be a loving human being. We can give it all kinds of names and different different titles. We think about it in our practice in the school that my wife, Minnie Ferguson, who's a Mexicana from Mexicali and deeper roots south, and Dr. Juan Gomez Quiñones and Dr. Irene Vasquez and myself and others co-founded. We hope is a practice of cultural relevance, something we hope is a practice of self-determination, of autonomy, something we call Anahuacalmecac, that we loosely translate into International University Preparatory of North America. That we copy from the language of the Declaration of Independence, the Me Too clause, that we too hold these truths to be self-evident, that our people have a right to exist, that our humanity has a right to dream, and that our community has a right to organize. And with all its flaws, shortcomings, and failures, we know that our practice in Anahuacalmecac, a little charter school in East LA, built on the foundations of independent Chicano schools established in the Chicano movement, built on the example of indigenous autonomous schools across the hemisphere, and built on the aspirational philosophies of the Calmecac and the Cuicacali and the Ixpoxcali and the Telpoxcali of our ancestors, that we try to see not only in our philosophies a way of thinking, but a way of doing. Sometimes we call this Xochian Maxtiloyan, and we loosely translate that into indigenous resurgence. Sometimes words in Spanish make more sense than they do in English, and sometimes striving to remember and relearn our indigenous languages is more helpful. It's more helpful sometimes to think about flowers and seeds and paths and water and fire and wind and earth instead of the concrete of the military industrial complex of schools that exist in the United States and in Western civilization today. Because then we can think about watering those roots and smelling those flowers and hoping from that smell, from that aroma, that we can understand when our ancestors smelled those flowers, that we can imagine when our children and theirs will smell those flowers, and that brings forth. Sometimes at the end of the day in our humanity, all we have is hope. There's really no good reason to think about why we can do this in the system of schooling that we have now, in a system that was built on or is being reimagined into a network of computers, whether it's brought to you by Google or Apple or Microsoft or whoever the hell is behind the multinational industrial complexes that we call schooling now. We know that our children learn best on the land, on the water, We know that our children learn best when their hands touch the earth. And when we are careful that when their feet touch the earth, we teach them not to crush the life beneath them. There are realities that our children face that, you know, some people would think just completely unimaginable. Sometimes those realities are violent. There's self-harm. Sometimes it's self-harm that our own people bring upon ourselves or do to ourselves. And so cultural relevance has to question and tackle that too. How we change harm to hope. And whether or not youth take their own lives or they torture themselves their whole lives and then raise tortured beings themselves. Part of our path has been to confront that. Dr. Quiñones would remind us, venimos a contradecir. We know that organizing and leadership and empowerment in our community have to be more than about helping somebody get a job, a career, a college education. That we carry with us the burdens of many. That as we progress in school, we don't come alone and don't succeed alone, even though sometimes it feels like we're alone. But that in reality, we're always living in an experience of intergenerational dependence. That there are still strengths in our collectivity. And in the spiritual dimensions of education that really don't fit within schools. Remembering that schooling has been described by some as the white man's last burden. The last step in the series and cycles of colonization, where we're convinced ourselves to self-colonize. And this is why we think in our proposals organizationally and socially, that autonomous community-based schooling is what is probably most important in finding a practice, in finding a path towards what matters in our humanity on this continent and how we teach our children. And that without that autonomy and without that foundation in community, schooling can only be oppressive. Our theory of change emerges from our community's shared cosmovisión, or worldview. Titlayolme. Sesentet seshinashli. Sesent. We are maíz. Each one of us is a seed, and each one of us is a seed sower. We cultivate this way our youth, our children, our power. And when we look over the history since the blowouts and since the invasion of this territory by the United States, and before that, the invasion of the continent by Spanish military forces, we know that within the first generation recorded by history, the history kept in the National Archives of Mexico of the Spanish Inquisition that took place in Mexico. Something interestingly that you'll find very little written about. That within that first generation, the Spaniards set out not only to engage in conquest through disease and war and rape and pillage and division, but also by kidnapping our children and turning them into spies. The records indicate that within the first generation, the children of the leadership of Mexico Tenochtitlan and their surrounding Altepet had been taken from the families that survived, that kept political authority, and were raised to act in the interest of the colonial power, and only then return to the families to act, as you would imagine, to find a closer example, maybe Hitler Youth. Serving a foreign power against the interest of self. It's interesting to think that at that time, a teacher who was a Nahual challenged the norm, even before the Spaniards. The story is that this Jaguar teacher was one of the wise people that told Motecuzoma y Vicamina of the coming of the Spaniards, warned them. And for that, he was banished and punished. But that even after that first stage of pandemic and invasion, he survived and continued to practice the traditions and continued to motivate people to keep the traditional ways, the traditional religious observation of our culture, continue to teach it and to teach outright against Christianity, against the Christianization that people were being forced to accept. And that he was captured by the Spaniards and set on trial in the Spanish Inquisition. And he was so feared, apparently, according to the records, that instead of burning him at the stake, they figured because of his supernatural powers, he would just survive. And so then they banished him from the territories of Anahuac and sent him as a prisoner to what would now be Cuba. But that even then the ship wrecked and nothing else was heard of him afterwards, not knowing whether he died or survived. And these kinds of teachings are part of not only what history our teachers don't teach, our students don't learn, but they're part of the reality of our history that seems so fantastic, so so impossible, so unimaginable. to try to understand in the days of a global pandemic today what it must have been like to have survived the killing of, I don't know, 250,000 people in what was at that time the largest complexity of cities on earth. It seems today that every day we hear about an elder has died, transcended, and I heard this morning that over 2,000 people died in the United States from COVID just yesterday. We remember those moments in New York City when COVID started taking lives and restaurants were being turned into morgues. And nobody knew how to deal with all the bodies that were being piled up. And one has to wonder what it must have been like. And yet we know we survived. And we know that we can survive even more. But we have to find in our survival meaning. And that's for all of us to determine. So on behalf of Anahuacalmecac, in our little community in El Sereno in Northeast LA, ancestral territories of the Tovangar village of Otsugna, in the larger continent of Semanahuac, we thank you for the invitation to speak in your class and for the invitation to think deeply and hopefully share with you the importance of your contributions, not just to figure out how to get by and get published, but to invite you to think radically about liberation, yours and mine. Mislasokamachiliya, profesora.
Asokamatli, hermano, muchísimas gracias. I was wondering, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because on your webpage, there's this beautiful like scrolling of pictures just to give students an idea of what an education at Anahuacalmecac may look like. So I'm going to go ahead and share that. And then maybe if you can talk a little bit about what schooling looks like there. Let me see, where are we at? Here we go. Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, so it's just gonna scroll through some pictures just so you can have a little bit of an insight as to what schooling looks like. But Marcos, if you can talk a little bit about what schooling is like at Calmecac, Anahuac.
Well, in many ways, it's just teachers and students and parents and family. And we look for the opportunities to celebrate ourselves, to find ways not to violate the spirit of the children, to make sure that at the most fundamental level, there is a sense of love and appreciation focused on the lives of the children, and that we find as many ways as possible to empower ourselves as families, and I include ourselves as teachers and educators in that process. You know, people come at different stages of life, and sometimes it's the parents who wish they had enrolled in Anahuacalmecac and their kids still don't figure it out, you know, when they're kind of dragged in from another school, another high school. You know, there's people who think that we're the Indian school and that we don't allow other people to come in unless you're Indian, and that, you know, still don't know if we're a private school or if it's free. And And in some ways, you know, it's interesting how the local community in El Sereno, which is probably about 60,000 people in just that area of Los Angeles, and our school is about 300 students from kinder to 12th grade. Our high school is very small, usually less than 100 students, and our graduating classes are typically between, I would say, between 10 and 30 at the largest size. And we've graduated about 8 classes of students since we first opened that have been raised with us from kinder to 12th grade. Originally, we started as an elementary school, and when our students got to the 8th grade after the first 5 years, you know, we had kind of focused on wanting to serve students at that age level for many reasons. For you know, for one, wanting to make sure that they were starting young as in terms of learning multiple languages. When we opened the school, Prop 227 was still in force, and so English only was the law of the land in California. And we set out to teach at least 3 languages, and at one point we taught Chinese as well. You know, it's the school space is an open space, so it's very different. It's one of our buildings used to be a Masonic hall, another one used to be a public library. They're all on the main street, and El Sereno right now is struggling with homelessness, and so, you know, there's been, you know, times when houseless people are wandering up and down the street, and our kids are going to school, like sometimes in many places in Los Angeles, going to school, walking through that, or walking through, you know, murders that have taken place up the street, even at 7:30 in the morning. And unfortunately, we've never lost a student to gang violence, and we've never lost a student to any other kind of violence. But violence is a reality in the community, and so we find ways to teach our youth to be healers at a community level in that way. And many of our families, you know, might have been formerly incarcerated or formerly involved in gangs, and they're looking for ways to help their children avoid those pitfalls and self-harms. And Semillas becomes then a part of that strategy for healing and for hope in what their own families can become. Recent data indicates that about 30% of our families are homeless right now, are suffering some form of housing instability. And that's not too unusual in Los Angeles anymore, unfortunately. And that means, you know, they might be sharing an apartment with another family or with extended family, as well as some that may be actually living in a vehicle or going from shelter to shelter or insecure. About 70% of our families are experiencing deep poverty. We know that because of the level of government assistance that they qualify for. And in El Sereno, over the last few months, since, well, a year now, we've been part of a campaign that's really an intergenerational campaign to address the housing crisis, and known as Reclaimers. And so we've supported through our school community and through our own advocacy skills, as organizers, have supported the Reclaimers through the Eastside Cafe and other groups organized autonomously. Both in this latest incident, although we weren't involved in organizing the direct taking of the houses, are certainly involved in making sure that the houses that have been taken over by the state of California are going to be recommitted to to people who need them. It's a complex struggle, and it's in a complex stage of the struggle right now, with new politicians coming in and different sets of organizing principles at play. But there's something unique happening in El Sereno on many different levels, and it's interesting to be a part of that and to try to help give some of the guidance that we've learned over the last 3 decades about organizing. You know, I mean, one of the most basic things about school that our communities usually don't control is who teaches the children. The majority of the teachers in the state of California are white.
Mhm.
And the majority of the teachers who teach our children in Los Angeles are white. And even those that aren't white sometimes don't deviate from a white supremacist type of educational model. So one of the most basic things that we feel we have to control through our autonomy as a community-based school is who teaches. And so having control over who teaches, over hiring who teaches, and over what they teach in terms of the curriculum that we design, the courses that we offer, in the inclusion of an anti-white supremacist education is part of the experience that our children get that's pretty unique. And it's why it's a loving environment. You know, at its most basic level, it's like, don't hire people that you wouldn't want to have your own kids around. And that solves a lot, you know, maybe 50% of the problem. So
Right.
not having been a student at our school, I know it's difficult. It challenges our kids, and as much as they love their teachers, and you know, like any kid, I mean, honestly, most children hate some things about school, but they love being somewhere where adults can appreciate them, just at a fundamental level. And what we teach them about exterior culture, about song and language and dance and regalia and planting and about our history, you know, it is different. It is different. But there's many things that are just, you know, we're just trying to be a good human community, and that's been important to us, to not try to raise children who are angry at the system, or raise people that are, just raised to think about you know, the problems only and not the solutions. But it's difficult because many of our parents don't speak even Spanish. They don't speak Nahuatl. And to immerse a child in multiple languages requires a huge sacrifice and commitment on the families themselves. And so to some extent, we're not successful at that, because it requires a tremendous amount of cultural shift on the family side. You know, we as educators can imagine what we would like the community to look like, but that's not what they look like entering the school community. And many times, even people who are very conscious of what they would like are still embedded in Americanization. They're still embedded in Anglo culture, in English, in the pursuit of a career, you know. And it's not that we don't want people to have good jobs, but why is it the privilege of white people to reimagine the future of a green economy? Why is it the privilege of wealthy people to be wanting to drive around in their electric cars? You know, why can Elon Musk go and violate the beaches of Texas to send spaceships into orbit, but we can't reimagine things ourselves in a different kind of an economy? You know, it's a tremendous amount of burden. And not all families are set up for that. You know, they're not all interested in that. They're not all interested in social change. They just want to survive.
That's so true. Um, we have about 5 minutes, and so I want to begin a little bit of a dialogue, Q&A, students. So again, and Tomas, this includes you, questions, comments for Marcos. Go ahead and unmute yourself so that we can hear your powerful voices.
I think your school is great, and the idea, like, I had never thought of that. So how did you go from just the idea of the school to actually building it?
And Dr. Quiñones would quote T.S. Eliot, between the idea and reality falls the shadow. We're still in the shadow. I don't know that we've actually accomplished what we set out to. I mean, in many ways, we accomplished what we set out to do within the first 5 years. You know, we started at a time when all of the schools in Los Angeles were overcrowded. There were 5,000 kids in Garfield High School when I was teaching there before we opened Semillas. The last school that had been built in East LA hadn't been built for 50 years. And now, like 10 years after that, billions and billions and billions of dollars were invested in building schools and school construction around the city of LA and the county. And so much has changed. I mean, it's a totally different environment right now from when we opened in 2002. But I guess to answer your question more directly, as teachers, as parents, as younger people with babies in our arms, when we first had our children, not wanting to leave our own children in the public school system, you know, to organize the level of discipline that it required us to be able to open the school was a challenge. You know, on the monetary side, on the financial side, we didn't have any money. I had to figure out how to find millions of dollars of funding to be able to buy a building, remodel it, and to begin hiring teachers. And so finding those resources were one of the biggest hurdles. We had to convince ourselves that we wanted to organize the school. And so we recruited teachers that were friends of ours. We recruited danzantes, we recruited professors, we conducted surveys across the city and the county, asking people, what would a school be like if you started a school? What would you want to see in a school that was organized for us? You know, what languages would we teach? How would you imagine that? And just going through that process, honestly, took us about 10 years. When we started actually organizing the school itself, there were no schools, no charter schools in Mexican communities or Black communities for that matter. Mostly charter schools were in white communities, and they were being used as tools to segregate themselves out. And so it took a tremendous amount of discipline and foundational organizing that I think you know, it shouldn't be discounted. That it's not enough to just have an idea about social change, but actually organizing that and creating what you know some of us call parallel institutions. We see Semillas Nahuacalmecac as a parallel schooling institution. It doesn't replace the school system, but it does give us a choice to not have to go to it for 20 years.
Yeah. That speaks volumes. And then there is one other question by Brianna, who wants you to expand a little bit on what you meant by the military industrial complex and schooling. And we have like a minute left in class. So.
Yeah, well, if you've ever seen a traditional high school, you know that the Army recruits students through the ROTC, and that in particular, they recruit poor brown and Black students to go to the Army. That's one example of the military industrial complex. Thank you. But the the larger infrastructure of schooling serves a purpose both in terms of propaganda for military systems, but also in its relationship in the economy. You know, it's a whole different discussion, but basically, you know, the economy is intertwined. That there is an understanding of schools as part of the national defense strategy that is part of both social control as well as a mental militarization of the citizenry of the United States, which is why you see half of the voting electorate of the citizenry of the United States willing to vote for somebody like Donald Trump.
Mhm.
It's not by accident. So it's not just military in the concept of the army, although it does include that. It's also military in the context of the idea of the United States as manifest destiny of white people.
Thank you so much. All right, so any last comments? Because I know we're out of time, but if there are any last comments before I wrap it up?
I do want to say that I think it's beautiful that he created his own school as a way, I would say, to decolonize the education system. And I think it's beautiful, you know, that he's giving other people the opportunity to get education that's not going to teach them in a European lens, and to actually know the truth, not just what they want us to learn.
Yeah, for sure, right? So that with that comes a lot of you know, the development of our consciousness, right? Because like Marcos was explaining, like the militarization or how that's tied in with schooling is that it's an indoctrination of our mind so that we are not able to develop our consciousness, right? Our conciencia. We're not able to tap into our ancestral knowledge, right? It like prohibits us from doing that. And that's why it's so important to decolonize learning spaces, to humanize, you know, education, and that it is liberatory. And for the most part, traditional schooling in this country is definitely not that. And so we do have to create our own spaces. And I think that, you know, you've heard it throughout the semester. It isn't just about analyzing the social injustices that are around us, right? Like that's step one. And then also dismantling those injustices, right? That's like tearing something down. But at the same time, you got to build something up. You have to tap into that imagination and that creativity and imagine this new world, imagine this new reality, and then start to find the resources and like-minded people to be able to create that. So while we're dismantling, we're also creating at the same time, because we have to be able to have a vision for the kind of world that we want to live in, right? Instead of only focusing on the negative, we also have to celebrate our resilience, right? And our ability to adapt and our ability to survive in situations in which we're not meant to survive, and our ability to create something out of nothing, right? So that's the legacy that our ancestors have left for us, and we need to continue that for those yet to come. So never, ever, ever doubt yourself that something is just too crazy, too wild, too outlandish. It's not possible, because you have seen throughout the semester that it is possible. It's possible. It's going to take a lot of work, a lot of dedication. It's going to take all of that. But ya saben, you're not alone. You have a whole community you didn't even know existed, ready to support you and back you up, right? So dream it and then make it happen, okay? And you're not alone in this. Hermanos, thank you so very much for your time. Stay with me for just a second. Students, if you want to go ahead and unmute so that you can say your thank yous and goodbyes.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, everybody.